Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Yes indeed, time for another rock and read. After I posted last week's rock and read episode, someone told me that they wanted to hear more of a particular book. I'm happy to oblige. So today we'll read chapter 15 and chapter 16 of Iron Man by the riffmaster Tony Iommi. Chapter 15 is called Earth to Black Sabbath. Here we go. When we played near Carlisle at the tow bar, they always put us up in a caravan. In winter it was so cold we burned the furniture to keep warm. One day we turned up at this gig in Manchester and there was a guy on the door wearing a suit and bow tie. We thought, this is weird for a blues club. He said, "Oh, you're Earth. Come in." In we went and he said, "I really like your new single." "Oh, thanks." We didn't have a single out at the time, but we took no notice, got all the gear in and set up. Then we saw all these people coming out in bow ties, suits, and ballroom dresses, and we realized they had booked the wrong band. We soon found out that there was another Earth, and that was a pop band. The manager caught on to us, but said, "You might as well go on and play." We played one song, and everybody out there, all expecting to dance, was going, "What is this?" They pulled us off. Then the manager wouldn't pay us, so we nicked the tea urn. We took the rug out of the back of the dressing room. We took knives and forks. We took whatever we could. And we said to each other, "That's it. We're never going through this again. We need to come up with a name that nobody else has." Jim Simpson came up with Fred Karno's Army. Hell, it was getting worse. Fred Karno was some old-time music hall impresario who had worked with Charlie Chaplin and Stan Laurel. Ozzy's idea was Jimmy Underpass and the six-way combo. So much for that. Geezer came up with Black Sabbath, and it just sounded like a good name to use. Jim Simpson got us our first gigs in Europe. The very first trip over there, we picked up Ozzy, and he showed up with just a shirt on a hanger. We said to him, "We're going away, you know." "I know." "We're going to be away for a few weeks." "I know." He only had one shirt and one pair of jeans, and that was it. On our way over there, we decided to change our name. Or maybe it was in one of the first clubs we played, the famous Star Club in Hamburg. It held 400 or 500 people. Because they had us back a few times, we were able to build a following, and we ended up holding the attendance record there after the Beatles. It was after the Jethro Tull thing and inspired by Ian Anderson that I had bought a flute and tried to play it on stage. We were smoking dope there a lot, and I was pretty pie-eyed. I held the flute way too low, so I was just blowing air into the microphone. Ozzy went backstage and grabbed this great big mirror, brought it out to the stage, and put it in front of me. He tapped me on the shoulder and I went, "Ooh." Another high point came when Ozzy found this tin of purple paint and he painted his face with it. There was a big ladder behind the stage and he climbed to the top of it until his head was over the curtains and all you could see was this purple head popping up over the backdrop. Crazy stuff like that helped us maintain whatever sanity we had. We did a couple of European tours in those early days. The first one took us to Hamburg, Denmark, and Sweden, and following tours also saw us travel to Switzerland, where we played in St. Gallen for 6 weeks. We played there for maybe 3 people, 4 or 5 spots a day. All we would get would be a glass of milk and sausage. No money. We were poverty-stricken. Geezer was a vegetarian, but he had to eat the sausages because we didn't have any money to buy him any other food. We all stayed in this one room above this cafe across the road from where we played. If you weren't in on time, they'd lock you out. One night, me and Ozzy went off with these two girls and stayed with them. Geezer came back from somewhere and couldn't get in, so Bill tied sheets together trying to pull Geezer up. As they were doing this, the police came by. It took quite some explaining in 2 different languages to sort that one out. We then moved on to Zurich. When we arrived there, the place was packed. The band was up there playing away, looking happy, and they even had champagne. We thought, this is marvelous. We'll have some. Little did we know, they had been there for 6 weeks, and it was their last night. All these people were there seeing them off, and it was a big party night. As soon as we started, the place was dead. We went, wait a minute, what happened? Where's all the people? They had this one nutter coming in every day. He'd stand on his head, all his money would fall out of his pocket, he'd pick it up again and leave. And there was this old sitting at the corner by the bar, and that was it. Because it was deserted anyway, we started making stuff up. And we thought, hang on, if Bill does a drum solo for one set, and I do a guitar solo for the next set, the other guys can have a rest. That was great for a couple days, but of course, they caught on. During Bill's solo, the owner's daughter came up and said, "Shut that noise! We're paying for you to play, not all this." It was a really grim place. We all slept in one room, together, with a bunch of rats. The owner of the club had taken our passports, so we couldn't get out. It was like slavery, with us playing 5 45-minute spots and 7 on the weekends with hardly any pay. But we did have a lot of laughs. Also because we had the occasional joint, and Bill smoked banana skins. He used to eat the banana, scrape all the residue off the skin, put it on a piece of tin foil, put that in the oven, cook it, and then smoke it. He claimed it got him high, thought it was great, and was really proud of it. What's Bill doing? Oh, he's cooking his banana skin. Well, that's the end of Chapter 15, so why don't we transition to Chapter 16. Chapter 16 is called Black Sabbath Records Black Sabbath. Here we go. When we played at Henry's Blues House, we had music business people coming to see us. We went to London to play at the Speakeasy once for that reason as well. Chrysalis came down to check us out, but the place was empty and the gig was dismal. It was all to try to get a deal. We got turned down, but that wasn't the end of the world. You gotta stick to what you believe in. Just carry on and don't change because you think that's what people want. That's how something new comes up. Doing what everybody else is doing is the easy way out. You gotta do your own thing. Tony Hall came to Henry's Blues House, liked what we were doing, and wanted to sign us. He had been quite a well-known DJ originally, and he now ran Tony Hall Enterprises, whatever that meant. We signed with that company, which in turn signed us to the Fontana label. I'm sure they did very well out of that deal. We only saw him on a few occasions afterward. He turned up once at Top of the Pops, but I haven't seen him since. Another figure from those early days was David Platts, who signed us to Essex Music. It was a deal, but I've been told they all were back then. Anyway, he certainly made a few bob off us. On very rare occasions, we'd go and see him. Strange, he had a button that he'd push that opened the door to a secret room behind his desk. He managed to survive a long time, probably thanks to that room. After getting a proper record company, it was time to record our first album. We received £100 each for our efforts, which to us was a lot of money, but of course, we would gladly have done it for free. Having an album out there would mean that people could hear us. We recorded a couple demos in the autumn of 1969, The Rebel and Song for Jim. The Rebel was a song that Norman Haynes from Jim Simpson's band had written, and Jim wanted us to do it. And I can't even remember how Song for Jim goes, but we named it after him as a bit of a joke. We first auditioned for Gus Dudgeon. already a well-known producer at the time at the Trident Studios in London. We didn't see eye to eye with him at all, and he turned us down. A couple of days later, we had a gig in Workington, and that's where Ozzy announced our name change to the audience. It wasn't a big deal. We didn't have a celebration or anything. We just changed the name to Black Sabbath. And our first Black Sabbath gig was on August 30th, 1969. But as far as I'm concerned, the band had been together since 1968. I always forget about the fact that we were first called Earth. To me, the four of us getting together is the only thing of importance. By that time, we had already played The Wizard, Black Sabbath, NIB, and Warning. Basically the songs of what would become our first album. We didn't want to play other people's stuff anymore. A 12-bar blues in the middle of all our new songs just didn't sound right anymore anyway, because our own stuff was so different. Nevertheless, we did record Evil Woman, a cover of an American hit by the Crows. Jim Simpson wanted us to do that because he said, "We need something commercial." We reluctantly agreed to it, but things were changing our way already, because during that same session, we also recorded our own song, The Wizard. Simpson used these demos to get disc jockey John Peel interested in us. In November, we played his show Top Gear, performing Black Sabbath, NIB, Behind the Wall of Sleep, and Sleeping Village. We were on national radio. Things started to move. Things were happening. We didn't choose to record with producer Roger Bain. He was chosen for us. We met up with him beforehand, and we liked him. He seemed like a nice enough guy. He was as green as we were, and he hadn't done much before. He was in his early 20s, just like us, maybe a bit older. Being the producer, Roger was overseeing the whole thing. He was good to have around, but we didn't really get a lot of advice from him. He maybe suggested a couple things, but the songs were already fairly structured and sorted. Our roadie Luke drove our gear to the Regent Sound Studio off Tottenham Court Road in London on October 16, 1969, and put up the amps. The studio wasn't much bigger than a small living room, and we're all in there playing away, with partitions between us and Bill. Ozzy was singing in a little booth at the same time as the band played. Everything was performed just like a live band. It was the most important thing we had ever done, so we were all pretty well on the case. I had never been in a studio before and didn't know anything about recording and where to put the microphones or anything. By that same token, I think it must have been hard for Roger Bain and engineer Tom Allum to come in and work with us just like that. Two guys who had never traveled with us, did not know what we were like, did not know what we sounded like, but came in and suddenly were adding their thing to it. The biggest problem we've always had is explaining to the people who recorded us how we have our sound set up. My guitar and Geezer's bass had to very much agree with each other to make the wall of sound. All of them just see a bass as a bass. Dum, 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 clean and neat. But Geezer's sound is more crunchy, more raw, and he sustains stuff and he bends notes the same as the guitar to make it fatter. Some of them would try to get him to take the distortion away, and it would be like, tum, tum, tum. Leave it. It's a part of our sound. It took a lot of convincing for people to understand that. They'd always separate the sounds as well. They'd hear the guitar on its own and go, "Oh, it's so distorted." I know, but play it all together as a band and see what it sounds like. People couldn't grasp that we were a band that sounded good together, no matter how an individual player sounded. Roger Bain understood it to a point, which is why those early albums we did with him have a very plugged-in sound. It was basically a case of what you see is what you get. We just walked in, plugged in, and played. Thank you and good night. And that was it. There wasn't much fiddling around with the sounds we had. The drums as well. They were just mic'd up and off we went, giving it that real, honest sound. And that was the sound that took off. Everything was done very quickly. We thought, bloody hell, we got a whole day to record these tracks? Great! That's brilliant. Later I heard Led Zeppelin spent a week recording their first album, but they were more experienced than us. They had Jimmy Page, who had recorded with the Yardbirds, and God knows who else before that. He had been in and out of studios, but we certainly hadn't, so we didn't have a clue. We did a track called Warning with a long guitar solo. Because it was such a long song, you had to capture it in one take, or else we'd run out of time. After the first one, Roger said, "Okay, that's it." Well, I wanted to try something else. That's it. "Can we do it just once more? I think I can get it better." Eventually, Roger said, "Okay, we'll do another one." So we had another crack at it, and that was it. Take it or leave it. The whole album was done exactly like that. Play like you play at a gig. You play it once, you don't have 10 goes at it. As we played it in the studio then, Warning was 15 minutes or something ridiculous. Roger and the engineer edited it down to about 10 minutes. They cut a big section and plucked out a couple smaller pieces in places I wouldn't have edited. I was upset because I felt it originally had a more natural flow, but you have to have a certain length for a vinyl album, and maybe a 15-minute piece was too much. The funny thing is, after we put a song like that down on record, it became the version we would play from then onwards. It gets accepted like that. So 40 years later, we're still reproducing on stage what we happened to do in the studio on that particular day. When we recorded Electric Funeral, for instance, Bill would play it differently every bloody time. He didn't know how many times to come in, and in certain parts, he plays 3 instead of 4, and we kept the 3. And to this day, we still play it that way. A lot of people think NIB stands for Nativity in Black, whatever that means. It's a typically American thing. They always have to go, "Oh, it's got to be something satanic." We called Bill Smelly, and we also called him Nib, because with his beard, his face looked like a pin nib. It just sounded humorous to us, and when it came to the title of the track, we said, "What shall we call it? Nib?" It was just a joke. I love my white Fender Stratocaster because I'd worked on it so much. I had it in bits and put it all back together again. I potted the pickups, filed the frets down on it, and basically did everything to try and make it easier for me to play on. One fateful day, I bought a Gibson SG as a backup guitar. 2 guitars. It was getting a bit flash, really. In the studio, right after recording the first track of the day, Wicked World, the bloody pickup went on the Fender. I thought, oh God, I'm going to have to use the SG, which I never really played. I recorded the album with it, and that was it. I just stuck to it. I actually swapped the Strat for a saxophone. I can't believe I did that now. That was a classic guitar, and it really had a different sound from the regular Strats because of all the work I did to it. Years later, Geezer saw it in the window of a second-hand shop and went back to buy it for me, but it had been sold and I'd never see it again. It was a right-handed Gibson SG that I played upside down. Then I met this guy who said, "I've got a friend who is right-handed and he plays a left-handed guitar upside down." I said, "You're kidding." I met this guy, we swapped guitars, and we were both happy. The Gibson SG had single-coil pickups, which, because I used a treble booster, caused a horrendous racket. I then potted and encased the pickups, and later on I put in different ones altogether. I was fiddling about with that guitar again, doing the stuff I had done to the Strat. That SG was very dear to me, but I don't have it anymore. It's been put out to pasture at the Hard Rock Cafe, but the deal is, if I ever want it back, I can get it back. We didn't have the time to get involved with the final mix of the album because we were off to tour Europe. There really wasn't a lot to mix anyway. It was recorded on just 4 tracks. It didn't have hundreds of drums on it or overdubs, so it was really very basic. Roger Bain and Tom Allom did add the bells and the thunder and lightning at the beginning of Black Sabbath. One of them got some sound effects tapes and said, "What about putting these on it?" We went, "Oh yeah, that's great." Because it is. It really sets the mood for that track. We didn't have anything to do with the cover art. The photo was taken at the Maple Durham Water Mill. We weren't there when it was taken, but we did meet the girl featured in the picture. She came to a gig once and introduced herself. I thought it was a good cover, really different. But inside the gatefold sleeve, you had the inverted cross, which opened all sorts of cans of worms for us. We were suddenly satanic then. But most of the excitement we felt at the time had nothing to do with that. We were just happy to have an album. Well, that's the end of chapter 16. Let me know what you thought of both chapters in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.